with many signifying the two escalating stage happening.
5, 4, 3.
We have stage 2 engine ignition. 1 minute 25 seconds. Check pressure hold. No we have ambulance 236 291 4229.
Hey guys, City Walk, City Wall here, and welcome back to Mars. What's coming to the city, I would consider pretty much like a mega project. Like, I've been working on this for a couple months at least, and in the city, this is a really big part of the city and would have been a really big engineering feat in order to get this made in Mars. So, if you couldn't already tell, we're building a Hyperloop. And this project is so massive because not only did it involve building a custom vehicle and a custom network and a custom train station, it also involves a ton of troubleshooting in order to get these trains actually delivering people to and from the edge of the map. It involves 2 different train stations and 4 different Hyperloop tubes that enter and exit the dome. And it involved builds that connected to all sorts of different parts of the city. The immigration area, the central market, and a really, really big addition to the central sorting exchange. So buckle up and get ready for this really, really big build. So in case you're not familiar, a Hyperloop is an experimental form of transportation that there's been some tests done to prove that this concept works, but as of yet, there hasn't been any real world examples of this. So this is just me having fun with the idea and trying to come up with a design for one. Basically, the way it works is there's a vacuum sealed tube where almost all of the air is pumped out of it. So when a vehicle goes through it, there's like practically no air resistance. Tube is obviously very long, very straight, gets you from point A to point B hundreds or thousands of miles away extremely quickly. Would be faster than an airplane. The vehicle inside is called a vac train because obviously it's like a train inside of a vacuum, and it has a giant turbofan at the front to suck any air that might be building up in front of the train to the back of the train so that it can really just slip through this tube. And Mars, in this particular project that I'm working on, I'm imagining this is mostly underground and connecting different domes on the surface of Mars that might be hundreds or thousands of miles away. So this would pretty much be just like a huge tunneling project, and only little tiny bits of the tube would be sticking out into the domes, like in the places where they terminate. So I'm imagining in this, Mars universe that we're creating here, there's obviously a few different kinds of domes. There's domes like this one, that's more of a city, but then there's other domes that are more like smaller and single purpose. Maybe there's a mining dome or an agriculture dome. And so workers who live here might have to commute to work using the Hyperloop. So under the surface of Mars, connecting all these different domes, there would have to probably be a pair of conveyor belts, similar to the ones that we're seeing around the city, but obviously going much faster for cargo, and then a pair of Hyperloop tracks, one in each direction, for passengers. So we can think of this sort of as like a passenger train station for Mars, where you might see people with luggage, you might see people taking a short journey for work in the morning and coming back in the evening. But like all things on Mars, there's obviously 2 versions, because the people who are using the Hyperloop in the lower levels of the city are doing it for a much different reason than the people who are using it in the upper parts of the city. So this whole build is going to be 2 different Hyperloop stations, a lower one and an upper one. So this project began actually in 2 different live streams. One of them was a patrons only live stream, one of them was the first live stream that I ever did, where we were looking at making a place for the people in the lower levels of the city to exit for the spaceport. And we built a little bit of that area, some places for you to like drop off your luggage and sort of a general entryway area. And after the live stream was done, I came back and finished this out, which actually involved deleting a lot of what I did in the live stream and redoing it. I added in this sort of like roof on top of it with some mesh that was pretty cool. A series of like gates and fences and people standing in line waiting to get out of here. And a really, really cool upper walkway for guards that's using procedural objects to paint all these different props yellow and get them to fit together all perfectly. Put a couple guards up there and like a desk with a couple guards sitting at it that I made out of like these air conditioning units or something. There's a little area for like lost luggage on one side, and on the other side is like an entrance and exit way for the guards to get into the building that's next to here or go up onto that walkway. And I made sort of like 2 exits to get you out of here. One leads you into a tunnel, which would then take you to the spaceport outside of the dome. And the other one, I made a stairway that leads you up and above this whole area. And this is what would get you to the Hyperloop station. And I wanted this Hyperloop station to feel pretty different than the rest of the lower area. So I made this custom walkway that's like pillars and glass and is just like very straight. And unlike most of the rest of the stuff that's down here, this is probably something that was pretty heavily invested in when they first built the colony. Because getting workers from where they live, which is here, to the place that they work, which might be far away, is like the whole reason that these workers are even here in the first place. So I wanted the station to be really clean, look like it had a good amount of money invested in it compared to everything else in the lower area, and also is very heavily monitored and controlled by security and guards, because if something were to happen to this Hyperloop, it would be a big, big problem for everyone in the dome. Before I could really move on and actually get to the station here, there was another area that I still had to finish, and this is something that I mentioned back in episode 6. I needed to come back and finish this area. It's the baggage pickup area. And so I placed some buildings here kind of on top of those capsule apartments that I placed down in that episode, put a couple decorations up on top, some really big Mars signs along the walls, and had this upper walkway come along the roof here and kind of like look down onto this area. So there's a big wall there. I put some like dangling signs, like maybe there were some sort of printed flag or something like that. I had to rearrange where the pillars for the conveyor belts up above went, and there's like a big wall here that I made out of expressway pillars that I PO'd to be different sizes. And so that kind of blocks off this underneath area of where the Hyperloop station is going to be, and this is likely where you would exit the Hyperloop station, at least from this side of the city. So there's some conveyor belts that need to come out of there that are the ones that give access, like road access, to this entire train station. It's what like allows the train stations to like actually function in the game. So that exits here, this conveyor belt, and that building that it comes out of has like a cable car station, like a terminating one where a line ends here, and the top of it was looking really plain, I think. And I wanted to add a building here that was like part of the upper parts of the city, but it was not like on an island. It was sitting on top of these buildings here. I copied one of the glass doors that one of those upper buildings has. That was obviously the same height, so I knew that was where I could connect up this upper area to this building. So that was just dragging some of those railway siding pieces a little bit closer and placing down some concrete pieces to make the flat surface of it, some ploppable surfaces, and underneath I actually did a really cool thing where I took another expressway pillar, the Ronix 69 expressway pillars, one of the horizontal ones, turned it into PO, and started just like messing with the vertices in order to make this into sort of like an arch support piece that like lined up perfectly to this building on one side and gave this whole walkway kind of like support from the side and from underneath. There's like an awning there and some lights. And the side of this building, some of it's very cool, but some of it had some like very questionable textures, if you ask me. So I clipped together another building into this. I used procedural objects again, obviously, to fit the buildings together like really perfectly. And this one has a really cool like mesh cover over the front of it. And so inside of that cover, I placed down a bunch of these glowing cubes that I made in the asset pack tutorial that I released. So that was actually pretty useful and made this whole thing glow up in a really cool and crazy way at night. I also wanted to finish decorating the tops of these buildings that were along the side here. So along the roof of that one really big residential building, I put a bunch of pipes leading to sort of like kind of like rooftop industrial area. Put another radio tower there that I'll connect up with some wires. And I also wanted to finish up these like 4 conveyor belts that like lead in and out of the city. So this area that's like right before they get to the central sorting exchange is going to be part of this station up above. And so I wanted to cover that up. And so I made like an entryway, and that area where it goes underneath like into this thing was the other area that was started in a live stream. And this was in the patrons only live stream. We ended up building a really cool place that you've seen before. I've actually showed it already because I built this so long ago. It was an area that was like part of this central market and just was like exposed and unfinished and made this whole area feel very unfinished. So I wanted to like close it off, and I was originally thinking that this would be like a mall inside of here and it would connect to the other side of the city. And so if you wanted to get from one side of the city to the other, you would have to walk through this mall. So I put up like a big wall here and made this really cool like awning thing using some of these like metal stalls that I use procedural objects to like rotate them and fit them together to kind of be like a marquee. Made some of these conveyor belts and this cable car line that was originally just going to go through an open space here, like actually go into this building now, and placed down a bunch of retaining walls, one of which, the one lowest to the ground, I covered with a ton of graffiti. And this is where our George Floyd mural is, which, by the way, if you go to the description, there's links to a number of great charities, which if you donate to and email your receipt to me, I will send you this asset in return. And so I just finished this area out with some more stalls, some trash in the corners, quite a few signs and graffiti. Above here, this is where the bridge is going to be that connects us from that first island that we made in episode 5 to this Hyperloop station. And this is also going to be sort of like the center of the city for the people who live up above. So there's a bridge that goes over here, and I did a similar thing creating this as the one a second ago. Did an even crazier thing this time with that expressway procedural objects arch. It's like curved this time, so it's even more messing with the vertices. And so that's connected to the side of the building over on one side and holds up the arch up above. So before I could actually place down this Hyperloop and start building the station, I actually had to make this asset. And this was by far the most complicated, time-consuming, long-lasting project of any of these assets that I've made so far. It started back in like April, just making the vehicle for it. I started off by just doing some general research about Hyperloops and what some of these vehicles look like, and I decided on a few different elements that I wanted to use. So I made the model in Blender, obviously, and then Lumoize, who I mentioned last episode, convinced me to try out texturing this using a program called Substance Painter as opposed to Photoshop. It's basically like getting to texture this in a Photoshop-like program, but doing it on a 3D model instead of having to actually just look at this unwrapped UV. So that was a little bit of a learning experience, just trying to figure out that program. The main like kind of difficult thing to do when making this was the spinning turbofan in the front, which thankfully I did have some experience making things like this. It's the same exact procedure as making helicopter rotors. So it's basically just like adding a helicopter rotor to the front of the vehicle and using the XZ flip mod, I think that's what it's called, by Ronix, to get that to spin in the correct direction. And then at a certain point, you know, just talking to Lumoize about this program and using it and making models and things, eventually got him on board to help with making some of these other models, because not only did we need the vehicle, we needed the network. And the network isn't just one thing. Each, you know, elevated, non-elevated, tunnel, all those different versions are different models. So there's really a lot that goes into it. So here with us is Lumoize.
Hey man, how's it going?
Good, man. Good to have you here.
That's awesome to be here. I love this series.
Dope. Well, you're obviously a mod on the Discord, and you also made that amazing opening intro.
Oh yeah.
So after I obviously gave you like sort of a tube shape that I knew was the 64 meters that you're supposed to make a Cities Skylines network, and the vehicle that I made obviously fit through it, I sent it to you without any textures, just as like basically a cylinder.
Yeah, after that, I wanted to really get a feel, so the first thing I decided to do was try to make the supports below the tube. Went through a whole bunch of different ideas and comps until I eventually arrived at this shape, which I really like the look of.
Yes, that was a dope one.
Yeah. From there, I decided to refine it to give it a supported steel frame. Decided to add a little bit more detail. Thought about the idea of using ladders on the side, as well as catwalks, and then these kinds of, I don't know, piston support.
Shock absorber, something like that.
Something that makes sense.
Yeah, the cool thing about this that I had never really quite understood how it works is the using like the alpha texture to make the ladder and the steel grates along the sides that you did. I think that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that was tons of fun. I did that in Substance.
Can you show me how you did that stuff?
Yeah, so here in Substance Painter, first thing I did is I gave it rivets, extra detail. I put a basic material on there and textured these as if they're normal metal, and then using a whole bunch of patterns and hand-drawn details, I drew on an alpha mask that faked the mesh, so it's all done via textures, so I can use 2 polygons and get this nice great texture.
Yeah, because it creates little see-through holes and things without it actually being extra polygons. It's very cool.
And that continued out through the whole, and we ended up making many things.
Yeah, so the next thing was obviously the tube, and the main thing about this that I wanted was for there to be glass sections so that you could actually see this vehicle going through the tube as it's like entering into the dome. So that was kind of a challenge because when you make networks, they can't really use rotor shaders, which is like what creates glass texture in this game. The rotor shaders only really works for building submeshes and for props. And so in the same way that you might see like street lights along the side of a regular old Cities Skylines road, those are like props that it adds in at certain intervals. So that's what we did, was we made a prop piece of glass and added it in every 8 or 10 meters or whatever it is along this thing. But the issue with that is obviously props can't bend, and this network can, so these little bits of props would be sticking out the side if we made this too skinny. So there was a whole thing about having to make this tube very, very thick, and that was kind of a design issue that I presented to Lumoize with this. So
yeah, that was a very interesting. My original idea for the Hyperloop was to have very similar to tech concepts with one nice long piece of glass tube. Started trying to think of ways that we could do it and the way to give the maximum amount of forgiveness in the bend. So I ended up insetting every single one of these little slits and then put this kind of greeble texture in between, and the glass can appear anywhere in here.
Yeah, in that range of areas, because depending on how sharp this turn is, which in a real Hyperloop there shouldn't really be any noticeable amount of bending. So when you're playing Cities Skylines and you're placing down a road, obviously there's elevated versions, there's bridge versions, there's tunnel versions, and in the back end of the game, each of those is its own separate model that has to be created and imported into the game individually. In order to actually have it look like it was going into a tunnel, there's one called a slope version, which is this one on the right here, which has like a concrete entrance to it. And this one, Lumoize, you were pretty creative with the way that this got put together. Like, how did you come up with this?
Yeah, this was a doozy. You gave me so many requirements. So first step I did was to take just a standard tube without windows, and you gave me a box that was supposed to be the correct dimensions.
Yeah, because basically you're trying to hide this like clipping. If you're looking at a road going into a tunnel, there's that like weird kind of triangle shaped thing that goes up and over the network. So we were trying to basically create our own version of that here.
I basically just took the box and I started thinking of it instead of a box as an enclosure, an overstepped. I extruded it from there, ended up turning it into this really nice concrete, basically bunker almost around the entrance in order to tie in this catwalk. Added some indoor catwalks, added a ladder, got a really nice texture, and used some clever tricks to use one texture for the whole pattern.
Nice.
Save space.
Bringing these all into the game, it's kind of like a whole thing with the asset editor. You really got to spend a lot of time in the asset editor to make a network like this. And to be honest, I don't really know if I set it up exactly perfectly. This is the first one I've ever made, and there's just like so many settings in there. So I was bringing it in basically as a train track, a one-way train track. And so I started off here with the vanilla train track and just deleted everything that came with it and started replacing bits of it one by one. But the last main thing was this station, which Lumoize, I basically gave you the freedom of design with this completely.
Yeah, so it's pretty fun. I took the standard tube model and cut away all of the center bits, exposing as much of it as possible. I started thinking about it as a subway entrance where you get in, you step into an area and you walk in. I capped off the catwalk on both sides, added a ladder. It worked out.
It worked out for you, but then once you gave this to me, this is like really where the nightmare started, because for the life of me, I could not figure out why a train wouldn't arrive at the station that I had made. So then at some point, I was doing a patrons only live stream, and I brought you on, Lumoize, to help me try and troubleshoot this.
Yeah, it's basically 15 minutes of us struggling and getting nowhere.
Yeah, because it was like trying to hook this thing up to the edge of the map and like figure out, you know, was it going to work with the vanilla station? You know, was it the network's fault that we weren't able to get any trains? Is it the station's fault that we're not able to get any trains? And it took a really, really long time to actually figure out what it was. It turned out to be two things. Number one, I couldn't be raising up the station from the ground. That kind of like ruined the road connection. I had to raise up the terrain and place the station down way up there. And then also, your station needs an actual station track, which is different than a normal track. I don't really know the difference, to be honest, but on the workshop, Bloody Penguin has a pack that is a bunch of station tracks. So all credit goes to Bloody Penguin's extra train station tracks, which basically I downloaded, used as a template, and was able to create an invisible train station track, which I then used to run through the middle of what Lumoize gave me, that model of the station. That was kind of a cool thing that was actually very helpful, having some people there to help troubleshoot it in a live stream. Thank you for doing that, Lumoize.
Yeah, it sounds fun to be there.
And thank you for collabing with me on this project. I mean, this was a monstrous project and you absolutely killed it. Obviously, you have a background in doing this kind of stuff, so this was, I think, in my opinion, like a really great team up.
Yeah, it was tons of fun working with you, and you know, I've been a fan of Mars since it came out. Getting to work on such a big part of it at this point was awesome and tons of fun.
Yeah, huge part of it, so thanks again, man. So the final thing this episode was actually building this lower Hyperloop station, which was super fun. I went through like 2 different iterations of this. The 2 things that got left over from the first iteration that made it into the second one were, number one, I used this really tall, skinny building and made it into this sort of like beacon at the end of the line here. And up from under this, and also from the other side, I made some stairways that lead up from that walkway earlier in the episode. Used the pedestrian deck prop pack by Kaminogi and some procedural objects like pieces that I tilted sideways to make the walls, and then another one for the ceiling. And the first time around, I was really going for, you know, building off of the style of that walkway with those same kind of like vertical concrete pillars and very concrete look. It had some like glass in between, you know, covering the whole thing, and I just didn't really like it so much. It looked kind of like a greenhouse or like an atrium or something, so scratched that idea and instead started playing around with some very dark colored procedural objects, Ronex Expressway pillars. So I started trying to like encase the station with a few different ones at different angles, really long, skinny, some like blockier ones on each end, and then some other blocky ones kind of connecting both sides of the station. And the opening where the train would arrive into, I wanted to be sleek looking, so I used some more and kind of like angled some of the vertices in some ways, and in other directions in other ways. I waited till like one of the back trains pulled up and stopped at the station and kind of got like a mark of exactly where the opening was, and used beams on the left and the right of the opening in order to be kind of like the ends of a place where I could put some glass up. And so I put some glass, you know, on both sides of that entryway there, and it wasn't quite dark enough in my opinion, so I doubled up the glass. I don't know if that was the right choice, but you can really tell that there's like something there, you know? And then the side of the station that's actually facing towards where the 4 conveyor belts that exit the city are, I wanted you to be able to like see into the station there, so I left that open and did another cool sleek thing on either end with some more expressway pillars, some really dark ones, put some glass in front of it. And right at this moment is when I decided to make that cube tutorial, because what I really wanted here was just like a glowing cube prop. And what I ended up doing with this was taking this prop and making a line with the prop line tool and copying that line in here and making like a very thin long strip on the top and bottom of this opening. I did a little bit more detailing kind of in the area between that baggage drop-off area and way up this big wall to the station, way up above. There's like a gap there. So I made sort of like a service walkway area where like there's some doors that lead out of the station and can get you on these catwalks for the Hyperloop. And also there's this big kind of hole in the ground that I put a bunch of pipes and industrial looking things and red lights, and then covered the top with one of the metal grates that Lumoize actually made. In the center of the station, I made this octagon shaped kind of like security desk that I think turned out really cool, where yet again there's more dark colored expressway pillars that directly inside is a few of those light up glowing cubes, and then there's also this little hologram that sticks up directly above it, kind of like there's a desk, like a glowing desk with like a hologram screen right in front. So I copied that, 8 times into an octagon shape, put some guards in the middle and guards like at the doors where the Hyperloop train actually shows up. Then over the top of the station, I took some more of those like St. Louis Arch vanilla monument buildings that exist and turned them into PO and got rid of the base of them, and then put like 7 or 8 of them in a row over the top of this whole station. And there's some upward facing lights towards the bottom and some downward facing lights at the very top in the middle. And because I wanted this place to really feel like it was pretty much the nicest place that the people in the lower parts of the city have access to, I found this really crazy looking kind of spirally statue and turned it into PO and made a big long row of them to kind of look like maybe a string of DNA or something, and then took some wires from the 2 arches at the very end and connected it to the ends of that. So it looked like it was kind of being suspended midair in the middle of this whole station. The last sort of details that I did was obviously a lot of decals on the floor, so cracks and stains and things, a lot of stuff that I used the Move It tool to just lower the decal just a bit so that it wasn't quite as dark and visible. I also put down a few of these new rust bucket sieve props. They're like little people, and there's a whole pack of them. They're citizens in the game, so I've downloaded that pack as well and have them walking around. But then there's also now this new prop pack, which is absolutely amazing. It makes it so I don't have to use Linda every time, which is great. So a few of those around here. And the last thing was just kind of like weird. I loaded into the game one time and all of a sudden there was like a fire going underneath both of these stations. And I have the no fires mod enabled. It wasn't like saying there was a fire or anything, but there was just like smoke coming out from the ground and I couldn't figure out how to get rid of it for the life of me. So I just went with it. I put down a bunch of grate decals all over the floor here and put some more steam and smoke kind of coming up from the grates, sort of like there was some sort of venting that was happening here. So I thought that was an interesting touch, even though it wasn't necessarily on purpose. So we're already done with like a full-length episode here, and we're only halfway done with this Hyperloop. There's still the entire upper station to build. So no secrets for next episode. You guys know what's about to happen, but this build for the upper area is actually pretty insane, and it encompasses a lot more than just the station. I just want to say, obviously this Hyperloop asset and the train are not 100% perfect. There was a lot of things that I wish I could have done better, but the fact that I'm making these YouTube videos and having to spend all this time making the assets, there's only so much time to really spend on any of it. So there are flaws. Please don't be bending it too much or having it go up slopes or things like that. It's really meant to go in straight lines. The stations obviously are meant to be detailed by you. There's no stairs or anything. So It would be awesome to see what, if anyone downloads it, what you make with it. Send it to me. It'd be cool to see. That's it for this episode, and I'll see you all next time on Mars.